I'm going to let Davey chat for a few minutes about some best practices on community engagement and facilitation.
All right, guys. So I didn't prepare anything super formal. As we've been kind of going through the last month with a lot of you guys, we've talked to you, and kind of a lot of your next steps are really about getting to that community meeting phase and starting to engage with partners and trying to figure out what that looks like. And so that's kind of why we thought this would be a good topic for this roundtable. So I really want to encourage you guys to speak up if you have thoughts or comments or questions. And really, this is really for you guys to share with each other. So I really want you to this is kind of your peer-to-peer time to kind of learn what other communities are doing. So I'm just going to go through kind of some thoughts and notes that I have from the community meetings that I've put together throughout the years. And then I think after that, we'll probably just kind of maybe popcorn around the room, and we'll have each of you kind of explain, where you're at in that process, what your questions are, what are some things maybe that you could share with some folks if you've had success or not success, whatever that looks like to you guys. So I'll go through this pretty fast and just going to kind of freewheel it a little bit because I didn't prepare as much as I probably should have. So some of the best things that I have found when I'm doing any community meetings, depending in any area, in any community, the first thing is just identify your stakeholders. And so when I'm thinking about that, though, try to think outside the box. I know that I've talked to a few of you guys already about make sure that you have your elected officials, your city commissioners, your county commissioners, your legislators, have them involved in that conversation. Make sure that you're including your nonprofit organizations in your community. Make sure you're including your economic development organizations. And also think through colleges and workforce. You really want to think about this through the whole project from start to finish. You might not have a clear idea of what that project is, but I think there's some common things that you're going to need to think about in the future for the project. So, would it make engage with the college or the high school now? Is there a way that you can start developing a workforce pipeline for whatever your end project looks like? So you really want to make sure you're kind of thinking through a little bit out of the box on who those people are. It's not just parents, it's not just employees, it's not just businesses. There's going to be a lot of different moving pieces there. So really do take some time to think through who those are. And then next, really get to know who they are and develop those relationships. You don't have to go out and make friends with every single person in your community, but lean on those that are there. So in terms of engaging with businesses, your economic development organizations, your chambers are going to have those relationships with those businesses already. And that's a really great relationship to develop. If you can get that relationship there, they can help you and kind of be your champion and start talking to those businesses for you. So think about it in terms of that. So identify who's really good to develop those relationships with. And it gets you a little bit more perspective too, I think, on what the issue is coming from these different angles all the time. And then ask them for their input, ask them to help with logistics, ask them to host it for you, ask them those things. I think the more that they feel like they're involved, the better the relationship it's going to be for you down the road. And you can really lean hard on the relationships they've developed with all these other outside groups. And they might have even more people to add to kind of your stakeholder list. So those are two things I think right off the bat, before you even start into that thing, think about that and really do think about it and start developing those now. You might not have everything you need to know for that conversation. You might not know exactly what your project is going to look like, but getting them engaged in the conversation and getting them to have a little bit of ownership in it is really, really going to help as you move forward in the process. The next thing that I always try to remember is really meet people where they are. Don't assume that they're going to know what the problem is. Don't assume that their understanding of the issue is the same as your understanding, that they have all that information. I really try to think through, if I'm talking to someone in this industry, how much are they going to know about childcare? How much are they going to know about HR practices? Really try to think through, meet them where they are and don't assume that they know it on a level that you do, or even from the same perspective as you. And allow them to ask questions, allow them to share, and really like try to articulate your own case, but really be open to them to add to that value for you. So that's all stuff to do even before you even get to any sort of community engagement meeting. And for the meeting, some things to think about that you don't think about until you've done a handful of these, but really do try to think about how do you eliminate some of these barriers. I know we've already talked to a few groups already about what time of day to host these meetings. Where are you hosting these meetings? How are people getting there? You know, this is a childcare meeting. Can you provide childcare? Can you get, you know, a couple of high school students to sit in a corner with some coloring books? It doesn't have to be super formal, but are you providing some of those things so that you can really get the most engagement? So try to think through some of those barriers as well. And also allow time for people to speak up. Allow time for, like, we don't need to fill every single second. Some people take a minute to ask questions. Some people take a minute to formulate. Don't let someone dominate the conversation. This is where a really good facilitator, a really good moderator might come in handy. And then also allow them to have a pre-survey or a post-survey. So those folks who maybe don't feel comfortable speaking up, they couldn't make it, you still get all of those voices included. And next, and then obviously virtual attendance, however you guys want to figure that out. That's something now I think is so much more common that it's a lot easier than it used to be much more inclusive about your attendance. But, you know, think through your logistics of that. If you're going to have kind of a hybrid model, make sure you have a good set of speakers. Make sure you have a good mic so that people can hear. Think through some of those logistics too, and make sure that you're really eliminating any of those barriers for people to not participate, because you really do want to have a lot of participation, and you really want to encourage it to feel inviting and friendly and fun, because you do those opinions are going to be very valuable. I think a lot of you guys are in this kind of initial stage where you're really gathering those relationships, so make sure you nurture them. You know, they're little flowers, they need to be nurtured. I think the next thing is really do think about coming prepared. So know what your solution is, know what your idea is, and be pretty, you know, be able to articulate that relatively well, but don't dominate that conversation. You really are engaging with the community so you can listen and you can get feedback, and they can be part of that solution. So even though you do want to come prepared in terms of like knowing what your idea is, don't let that dominate the conversation, because you really do want to get a handle on that. Also, the great time to engage a facilitator or moderator here, because there is a tendency for people to get negative in these types of meetings as well. They want to dwell on what the problem is. They want to dwell on something that didn't work. So really having someone there that can like help you navigate those voices is really, really helpful. And also give them some food. I think all meetings work better with food and drink. And then finally, the last thing, when I've done these meetings, as I go through them, I always like to sit back and I like to identify my champions. So when you're sitting in these rooms, you're going to pick out these folks that are, you can just kind of tell they are the people who are going to do the work. They are going to, you know, go tell it on the mountain. They're going to shout about it in the streets for you. They're really going to be your champions. Identify those folks as in that room. And that's really going to be your kind of base core support group as you move forward. And these community meetings, like you'll identify them, trust me. But then you really want to start to create them. You really want to start including them in the process. You really want to try to nurture whatever it is. Sometimes there's a lot of squeaky wheels that come forward and you think are going to be really great, and they might not be the best, but they can really become good champions, but they need a little bit more work than someone who is a little bit maybe more of a doer than just a talker. But talkers are important because they're going to be people who are out and kind of talking about your project for you. So those are things that when I'm doing community meetings, those are things that I always look for. And obviously it's not the end all be all. That's a very, very short list of things, but these are things that I've done that I know have worked for me and have been successful. So I'd really just like to hear kind of what your guys's thoughts are, what you've done. And I think if we could just kind of maybe just go around the room and people could share sort of where they're at in their process, like have you had a community meeting or are you looking to plan one? And do you have some successes or do you have something that maybe didn't work that, you know, the rest of the group might benefit from? So if we just want to, does that go in line with your agenda, Ashley? Sorry, I think I'm jumping ahead.
It does. We talked about breaking into smaller breakout rooms, but there's not a ton of people on right now. So I think that just going around and kind of popcorning is probably a really good idea. And I can call somebody out that I know has chatted with their community if that helps to maybe get us moving forward. So just because I'm looking at his picture, Dean, I know that you've reached out to some different community members and you guys have a pretty big committee going right now. So maybe you can share some insight.
I'm happy to be called out this morning. Happy New Year, everybody. Trying to think of what brilliant insights I have. I can tell you that we've kind of taken the approach. We've been meeting with political leaders, with business, with actually several different sectors of the economy, broken into sectors because they have different needs. And we've also been meeting with different geographical groups because even though we're concentrating on one county, things like traffic patterns and building density and that sort of thing are quite different around the county. So we've been sort of separating out groups by geography as well. We tend to take the approach of, we're asking initially, you know, is this a challenge, childcare? Already assuming that it is, but we want to hear it from the partners, exactly what their perspectives are. And it really helps, I think, if we start there to let them articulate what their particular needs and frustrations are and so forth. It sounds pretty basic, but it's a pretty good way to engage everybody and get them participating. And then I think it's really important to keep the meetings spaced so you're not demanding a lot of time, and to have a set agenda, you know, all the sort of basic stuff so that it doesn't feel like you're wasting anybody's time and convening for the sake of convening. Right now, we're in the process of putting together basically a framework of costs. Things like, you know, what does it cost to offer family-friendly services as a business? What does it cost to subsidize a slot at a childcare? What does it cost to actually pay a worker? And then we're gonna reconvene all these groups once we have some actual hard numbers for them to react to, as opposed to saying, what are you willing to pay? But in other words, let us do the research and let us go a couple of steps towards making the sausage, because that's not what they do. And it is our strength. And so let us present at least a place to jump off, and then they have something tangible to react to. How's that?
So I have a question. Are you working with businesses to start like childcare on their site? Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Dean, that was great. Can you identify any barriers that you guys had or have had?
Tons of barriers. I think probably the primary one is the distance between everybody recognizing this is a problem and wanting to invest in one way or another, and actually covering the costs of what it is. There's a real challenge in convincing people that it costs what it does to offer quality licensed childcare? Like, how can it possibly be that much to do this?
Thanks, Dean. Would somebody else want to share? I put some kind of prompting questions in the chat from the agenda if you or would like some guidance. But thank you, Dean. That was wonderful to hear. I'm looking at everyone's pictures.
Actually, I'm willing to share. I'm Kelly Triller from Beaverhead County with the 0 to 5 Beaverhead County Local Collaborative through Headwaters. We also go by the Early Childhood Coalition of Beaverhead County. That's our other kind of pseudonym. We have not, we're kind of in the early stages of this childcare project, but we did do, as part of our Headwaters planning grant, we did a landscape assessment and a whole bunch of research at that has kind of led us to this project. But I'm reflecting back on that process and the community meeting that we had in July to present the data. And that was a larger collection of like everything 0 to 5-year-old in our county, not specific to childcare, although we did think a lot about and ask a lot of questions around that to kind of figure out if that was an issue that we needed to address. But one of the things that I, like reflecting back, realized is that we didn't, we presented all of the data and we had lots of really good conversations and ideas and things, but we didn't have like a lot of really specific action items, or we didn't engage well after the fact with our meeting participants. And so now it's been like 6 months and they haven't heard from us very much or haven't been involved very much. And so that's one of the things in this situation that I want to make sure that we leave each meeting with a really specific like to do, so that we really make sure to kind of continue that momentum, because yeah, like I said, in July, it was like we left with kind of our wish list and our dreams. And then there were individual people that kind of were like, I can help with this, or call me when you're ready to do this project. But it was really just a couple people. And so this time, I think that's one of my like biggest takeaways, is to make sure that we leave every meeting with a real specific action item and who's doing it. And, you know, how does each person kind of follow up in the interim? Because it's easy to let a month go by and nothing's happened.
Thanks, Cal. And I'll add to that a little bit. Or I guess a question: are you planning those to-dos? Like, do you kind of have like when you go into the meeting, do you have an idea of what you think is going to be the next step? Or are you just waiting for that to happen as the meeting goes on? In my experience, it's nice to have at least an idea of what you think should be the next step. So then if nothing emerges, you have a plan.
Yeah, I think the latter. Having kind of a general timeline and kind of those, yeah, general sense of what needs to come next, and then let it evolve throughout the meeting. But yeah, go into it with an idea. The same way you said, or you talked about, you know, go in with a solution, but don't necessarily dominate the conversation. You know, the same idea there. Go in with some sense of what's happening, and then make sure that you're able to yeah, kind of follow up and maintain that momentum.
I'm going to add something there, Kelly, because I think you really hit on a really important thing. I use what we call tangible task list at the end of every meeting. And whenever I facilitate a big meeting or even a group working group, I end with kind of a tangible task, and that tangible task list goes into the minutes that are sent out. And at the bottom, it says this is it, and it gives accountability at the end of the meeting, and it gives accountability at the beginning of the meeting. So then a lot of times we'll open up the meeting with that tangible task list and ask for reports out from those that were assigned or who volunteered to take it. It's a really good way to keep it going. So as you guys move into your steering committees, that's something to really keep in mind, is how do you track who's doing what, and use your minutes as a tool to do that, because that's really a good way to, because then you're sending it out, you're giving them a reminder without necessarily writing anybody to say, hey, get this done.
Would anyone else want to share about the work that they've had? I know we had a good meeting I think it was last week up in Lake County, and there was a couple childcare providers on. Was it Lake County? No, I'm sorry, it's Mineral County. Sorry, I'm looking at Lacker and I mixed up your.
Yeah.
county.
So our county is kind of unique in that it's, yeah, we're working 3 different communities that are separated by, I don't know, Jess, 100 something miles, and trying to address childcare as a county is challenging. But we've had several high quality childcares open and then close because people don't utilize them. And so as I've been working in my current position, schools have started 4-year-old preschool. And so that's been exciting. And so we see that, and people are taking opportunities to send their kids to 4-year-old preschool, or they can't call it preschool. But we don't see families taking advantage of the childcares that we have, and then they close down. And so we're just trying to figure out how to support or how to address maybe the culture around childcare in Mineral County, and the need for it. Because what we see that happens is when families really need it, it's not there, because people can't make it a sustainable business. However, we have the children in the county, so it should be a sustainable business. And so we're just trying to figure out why our childcare is not working out, and how can we support the ones that are currently up and running to keep them from shutting down right now. Does anybody else have experience with maybe like a culture not accepting high quality childcare? Is that a Montana problem?
I think that your county is the first one we've heard of that very specific part.
Yeah.
But if I'm remembering correctly, we had a conversation with Callie about parent education, right? What was it? Making sure I got my stuff together. And really talking about like what the importance of high quality childcare is, and really kind of why you would choose a licensed childcare provider or over some, a friend of a friend's who isn't licensed, who's offering care out of her basement, or, whatever it is. And so I think that your communities are probably have some similarities there, that maybe we can talk about some parent engagement and how do we get parents on board with it. And I think a lot of that is education. In my experience working in early childhood, a lot of parents they don't even know what childcare licensing is or what it does, and they don't quite understand why you would choose that. I did read an article a couple of years ago that said parents look for like 3 things, and it was like the price, does their child feel loved, and where the child care is at. And those are all 3 important things, right? But we know there's a lot more important things too. So really kind of helping parents understand why we have these systems in place and what's so great about licensing. And when you tell parents like, oh, if a program's licensed, that means they've all had background checks and they're all CPR certified and they have to have professional development. Then they start to go, oh, those all sound great. So of course I would. But I think it's just, there's a disconnect about why you would need, or what does licensing do kind of thing. So.
Yeah, and from a like in a community like engagement, like I think doing that parent education, but I think that's again like when you think through it, like your stakeholders are your parents, but like would it make like, can you bring in some employers to that conversation and say you could provide this as a benefit to your employees? And we all know everywhere across the state is in need of employees. So is there is there ways for that conversation to bring in those stakeholders that you wouldn't necessarily think like would have a big part in that, but they could be a really powerful relationship and maybe a solution for that particular type of problem. And so I think that's when you're thinking through like, at the end of the day, it is a community issue. And so who's those community stakeholders? Like, obviously you guys have providers, which is not something that like a lot of other counties have, but obviously there's something happening there where the community isn't embracing it in the way it should. So who are those other stakeholders? And I know we talked about it whenever that was, like way before Christmas, like a million years ago. But bringing in employers, like those are your other stakeholders that might have a really great partnership to start to develop those relationships there too. So that's where, when you think outside the box of who needs to be involved in that conversation.
One of the other things we've talked about and thought about is like trying to which is great now with the ARPA funds, but trying to incentivize more of the at-home, like essentially family, friends, and neighbor, but the folks who are like, hey, my kid's about the same age as your kid, can they come over 2 days a week or whatever, trying to incentivize some more of those folks to be licensed, because right now there is a lot of that happens in our community. And I think having more kind of licensing, but also that incentive, so that like if you become licensed, then you'll also qualify for these ARPA funds, is a really helpful kind of combination. But we also know that like it works great if you have friends in our community, but we have a ton of new families moving in. And so, and this might be the same in Mineral County, but that it only works if you know people. And so for the newer families that don't know people, they rely on like being able to look up that state licensed childcare providers. And especially like being licensed provides that trust, that level of trust that like they've been checked into and it's a safe place and all those different things. And so I think originally Beaverhead County, and maybe like I said, maybe this is the same in Mineral County, there was a lot of like independent relationship building that happened to be able to provide that childcare, and now that's working less and less well because there are so many new families. And so we're kind of thinking through using the ARPA funds to help incentivize folks who are already doing that kind of home-based care, not like a center or like truly like they're watching like a couple kids, but incentivizing them to get licensed, but then also helping our non-licensed providers realize like this is not just for you, like this is for parents trying to find care. It connects the dots.
So how are you incentivizing that?
Well, the ARPA funds is which is the great part. So if a existing provider who's not licensed becomes licensed, then they qualify for the ARPA childcare stabilization grants. And so it's hard to find the unlicensed providers, right? Because there's no like tracking. So it's kind of the word of mouth piece. But as we do learn about the various folks who are providing this sort of care, being able to say like, have you considered licensing? Here's what it looks like. And if you do, you then qualify to apply for these stabilization grant funds, which is a significant incentive right now that doesn't cost us anything.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some other incentives to becoming licensed too. So for families, they could take families that are on Best Beginning Scholarship. And right now the income eligibility has been increased. So it's at 185% of the federal poverty guidelines right now. And the daily rates are really high right now, much higher than they have been in the past. And I'm sorry, I don't remember them off the top of my head. I'm thinking like for an infant, $40 a day or something like that. So that's a huge incentive too, because there's a lot of families that maybe are missing care because they can't use scholarship, or that are not paying as much as they potentially could if they were able to have scholarship as well. And then there's the opportunity for things like providers to become part of the STARS program, which has, you end up with incentive money throughout the year. And then also, what was my other thought? If you are working in a licensed childcare, the providers also qualify for stipends from the early childhood project for higher ed and like finishing the 60-hour preschool course or the 60-hour infant toddler class, they can earn money that way too.
So is it typical for rural counties to have problems with people becoming licensed because of where they live? Like their house is just not licensable for childcare?
I'm not sure if I know the answer to that one. Someone else might know that. I do know that the couple things that I've heard in the past that make it hard are their space where the kids play outside has to be fenced in, and a fence is a pretty big cost. And then sometimes if they're like utilizing basements or just the layout of the house, they'll have to install some egress windows. But all of the R&Rs also have startup funds for childcare providers too, to help cover some of those costs. So they call them mini grants. So you just submit a grant and they can help provide some money for those kind of situations. Anyone else have any questions or any insight? I know that Taryn had emailed me and asking to meet with Karen, so I kind of wanted to introduce you guys too. And I'm guessing this is where some of our questions on the Mentimeter came from about meeting with the business community and trying to set up some MOUs and some slots. So Karen, do you have any advice for Taryn as they move forward? They're going to open an on-site childcare, and they're hoping to partner with a few more businesses in Kalispell and maybe sell some slots and do it kind of the way you guys are thinking about.
Yeah, sure. So I'll just explain kind of what we're thinking, although we're still working with Ashley and Caitlin kind of around what is a model that's going to work best for us. But currently, St. John's United has a relatively large childcare operation. And we have the brick and mortar space, but we go in the hole anywhere from $125,000 to $250,000 a year. And so what we would like to do, we don't need to make money, but we would like to make that not bleeding out money anymore. And so what we'd like to do is bring on additional business partners so they can actually pay a membership fee that increases wages of our childcare staff, because we can't, this isn't new to anybody, but we're having a difficult time retaining and attracting childcare staff because their wages are so low. And so what we are talking about doing is bringing on 2 to 4 additional business partners. Right now, our childcare is for our employees, but it's also for the community. And actually, about 75% of our kiddos are community kiddos. So we have quite a bit of capacity to, I guess, move that into more of an employee childcare as kiddos grow up and age out of the program. So what we're looking at right now is actually using the stabilization grant dollars we were awarded from ARPA to increase our community rate, as well as our employee rate. Use that rate increase to increase wages across the board for our childcare workers. And then for at least 2 years, use the grant money we received to offset that rate increase. So we actually give a discount to our community members and our employees so that they wouldn't see their rates get jacked up, but they would get increased so that we can sustain and increase wages for our staff. Then after those 2 years, we would then be able to decrease and offset, discount that rate increase with these additional business partners. So we calculated this out so that we could hire 6 additional Center for Generation staff, so that they could take on an additional 20 kids so that each of our partners, if we're thinking if it's going to be evenly split, they each get, about 5 spots for kids. And then they would pay a portion of that amount that we go in the hole. So we'd take about anywhere from $150,000 to $200,000 and divide that up by the partners, and they would each pay that amount to be in the partnership. Now, we talked about doing that just as MOUs. We also talked about getting rid of our Center for Generations and creating a new LLC with each of these partners going in. We're still talking about the pros and cons of those models, but the partners are excited because they don't have to pay for the brick and mortar. They don't have to manage it. They just get to provide this as a benefit to their employees.
Can you talk a little bit about how you kind of found the folks that you're working with, and maybe, how did you, when you approached them, or did they approach you, like what did those conversations first look like?
Yeah, I have the luxury of my past life I did workforce development for Yellowstone County. So I built these relationships with a bunch of different business representatives in the community. And we talked a lot about childcare for a long time in the realm of workforce development. And so I already had these relationships because of that position. But I would suggest anytime there's a conversation around workforce development, childcare comes up. And that makes it a much easier invitation to have a conversation because they bring up the fact that is a sore spot for their business. So I would say if you don't already have relationships, I would reach out to your chamber or your economic development port authority. I know not many organizations have their own workforce development, but Helena does with Helena Wins. Missoula is economic partnership, I think, but just get your chamber together, ask them if you can do a quick session around childcare and see who comes to that and wants to work on that as a solution. And then I would find who raises their hand highest and who can be your coalition of the willing.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
I imagine our center being fairly similar to yours. So
Yeah.
I'm interested to make sure. I mean, I've already looked at some financial, or kind of came up with a really simple pro forma, but I don't know how realistic it is. And yeah, we're essentially looking to partner with businesses to provide them the benefit of having these spots. Childcare is a huge need in our valley, and we won't need all 73 openings that we have for our staff. So we're hoping that it would provide some stability too, and being able to hopefully sell them for a 5-day period each spot. So then you're not having the fluctuating rates with part-time. So
yeah, we don't do part-time or full-time. We just do, you pay for full-time, whether you bring your kiddo there full-time or part-time or not, because it does make it a lot easier and you can count on that income. And then another thing, Taryn, that might be helpful is we function with all of our other organizations closing down. So SCL Health had an employer provided childcare, MSUB had employer provided childcare, and we went off the number that it costs about $250,000. You go in the hole about $250,000. And so if you can have that number, then you can kind of figure out, maybe that gives you a good range of how much each of these partners should contribute to kick that off. Because that kind of seemed to be where the number, that's where organizations would close their childcare, is once it got to that point. So that's what we based off of.
So we were kind of originally thinking of giving it a daily rate, essentially, or a rate for a spot. And I started off using our daily rates for the community. And in order to make it financially look a little better, we had to increase that for these. I don't know if businesses are going to be willing to pay a premium for these spots or not, but I'm really curious to start having those conversations and seeing how people take it. I think it would be a great benefit to be able to provide some of these smaller businesses to kind of set them apart and retain their staff.
Yeah, we talked about too, like maybe you do a sliding scale for how much, depending on how many employees the organization has, so that you don't rule out smaller organizations, so maybe like a Monster with 300 plus employees has to pay this percentage of that. Well, and you kind of just, maybe that's helpful. We also are going to implement a sliding scale for the rate. So if you make in between an amount, you don't pay as much as other people do. And so we're playing around with a lot of that because it's really tough where, you know, the cost is out of reach for some. And yeah.
I did a lot of work with the hospital's daycare here when I worked at the hospital, and we thought about that, and then it got to the point where it was like, who's going to manage that? Who knows if the people are being honest about how many incomes they have in their household and so on. So we didn't do that, but I'd be curious to pick your brain about a million things sometime if you have
Sure.
time.
Yeah, I'll just put my email in the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And Taryn, the nice thing about partnering with somebody is you guys can make it look how you need it to look. So what Karen's doing is essentially they're going to have a membership rate, yearly membership fee that they're going to pay. And then, but that's separate from tuition. So then the business itself that they're partnering with can decide if they're going to supplement that tuition and pay for that tuition also, or are their staff going to pay for it? You know, are they going to pay part of it? That's all on them on how they want to do that. You don't.
So you collect from the business and none of the employees.
Actually, we would collect from the employees and then the business would reimburse
Okay.
their employees. So everybody would pay,
Okay.
like, let's just say infant care is the new raise rate is $280 a week. That would be the rate for everybody. And then that business would then decide, hey, we want to subsidize that by 30% or whatever that looks like. We have ours subsidized at 28% for employees. And then again, we're going to raise all those rates, but use that stabilization grant money to offset that for a couple of years so that there isn't an increase in rate for anybody.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? Can you do subsidies as well as use the Best Beginning Scholarship?
I don't believe so, but I'm not the expert there.
Okay.
I think so. How Best Beginnings work? Hold on, let me think through this. I think you potentially could, if you were charging the parents, if the rate was more than what the scholarship is.
Okay.
I think you could, it depends. If parents are paying anything, I feel like you could be able to use Best Beginning Scholarship on that. I think we would have to like write out what the numbers are and figure that piece out. I think
Kind of like when you have insurance and then Medicaid is like a secondary.
yeah,
You
because
have
you're
the subsidy.
still paying a rate for it. So if there's any leftover piece, and that's how it was like when I worked for the Early Head Start Childcare Partnership Program. Essentially, they billed Best Beginning Scholarship first, and then any overage Early Head Start paid for. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And right now it's a little bit, there's all sorts of confusing pieces when you throw in like copays and stuff like that. So it would just be really learning the system and making sure that you've got it figured out. Because
I can imagine in like a hospital, there's a lot of employees who aren't making enough to pay for childcare still, even if it was subsidized. There's, $14, $15 an hour isn't very much when you're paying for.
And I think Center for Generations, you guys take scholarship kiddos, right? Where'd you go? Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, we're coming to the end. So did anybody else have any thoughts or any ideas or questions or barriers they're facing when trying to get community members together and really just trying to get more people to the table? This isn't going to be the last time we offer answering questions. You guys can definitely, if you're, we're done here and you go grab a bite to eat and you go, oh my goodness, I just thought of something, feel free to email us. But I did want to share, I put in the chat.
So this is really like, these roundtables are really like an opportunity for you guys to talk to each other. So we really obviously like you guys have just been doing. So if there's something else and anything else you guys want like this is your opportunity to get together, as you know, you're kind of all spread all over the state. So this is really your guys' opportunity for your kind of peer-to-peer learning aspect of this project. So feel free to jump in, to change topics. Like, we're not trying to dictate any of these conversations for you guys.
All right, so I do want to share with you guys in the chat, I put a link to a resource list. Let me see if I can open it up on my computer real quick. That I put together pretty quickly. Our goal is to have more specific resource lists for each community. So that is what I will be working on this week. But these are some of those statewide resources that you've heard some people mentioned. I think Tracy popped one of these in the chat. I don't remember which one it was. But they're on here. In the top part is mostly those business resources, the economic developers, the USDA, that kind of stuff. And then as you go down, there's some more of the specific childcare resources. So here's the information for the Early Childhood and Family Support Division, childcare licensing, Raise Montana, the Early Childhood Project, Montana Association for the Education of Young Children. And I feel you might not know what these agencies or groups do yet, but we are going to have a presentation from the ladies up at the Early Childhood and Family Support Division, and they will touch base on a lot of this stuff. And as you kind of learn about your communities and learn more about early childhood, they're in there. If you have any other questions about them, just let me know. I am working on those more individualized resource lists that will talk about which R&R serves your county or resource and referral agency. So they're great people. If you haven't already spoken with them, I'm messed that up on somehow. But I will get those out to you guys. So we'll get, I think Sophie and I will be able to tackle some of those this week. I started last week of getting your local extension offices information and getting all that. So we will hopefully get at least a chunk of that to you. There's a lot of resources in your communities, and we want to make sure that you guys are utilizing all the resources that you can or you have. So just let us know if we're, ever forgetting something, or you came across meeting somebody and you're like, oh my gosh, this person was amazing. And it's all about community engagement and working together. So the more people we have on board, the better. So let me know. Do you guys have any questions or anything else?
Did you say that you put that in the chat?
I did. Did you see it? It should be way at the top.
I'm just seeing the agenda. Maybe
It should be right under the agenda, but I can send it again.
Sorry.
Ashley, can I just have a recommendation here? I've worked in economic development for a number of years now, and one thing that I've seen is people like to make a lot of calls on their own financials. Like, we have funding and they just start making phone calls on funding sources because they see something pop up somewhere. I'm going to highly recommend that, MCDC has a lot of experience in that, as does your local economic developers and others. Let them help you guide when you guys get to that funding component, like when you're putting together that scenario. You can definitely do it on your own, but it will save you heartache and time if you reach out to those that know how, and they actually know how those programs work. So like Ashley, you put up the USDA. I am a huge fan of USDA Rural Development. I've used them throughout my career. We are partially funded through them, but they have multitude of programs. And then under USDA, there's like 8 different programs with 20 different programs underneath them. And so make sure that this is where those resources come in handy, because instead of you spending all this time or putting together applications that you may or may not even be eligible for, if you're working with a local experienced economic developer that has gone through it, they're going to be able to help guide you to what programs are actually worth the time to put in, or that you have a better chance of getting. So just something to keep in mind. You are absolutely welcome to do your own research, find funding sources. We've had that happen where somebody's like, what about this? It's something we've never heard of. It's always good to look at it, but just know that it can get very overwhelming and complicated. And that's what those guys are there for.
And we will have those contacts for each of your individual. We're going to do it by county, I think. So we'll have that to you by the end of the month. So you will get you those contacts. And if you guys want those introductions, we're happy to make those introductions for you as well.
Awesome. Well, I thank you everybody for coming today. And it was wonderful to see you guys and hear all about your community engagement strategies and things you've been working on. And I know that our roundtable next week is going to be postponed, but I don't have the exact date yet. I know it's going to be the week of the 24th, and I'm hoping to have that date in the next couple of days, because with the holidays, it was just lots of back and forth. And but we will have the ladies from Child and Family Support Division give you guys kind of a rundown on licensing and STARS and what you guys need to know for getting a program up and running. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. Please, if you are eating lunch and you think of another question or something, just let me know.
Thank you.
Bye.